Well, thank you all for coming back. Yeah, there's plenty of room in the front on the floor if anybody at the back wants to come and sit on the floor at the front. So, this talk actually has two titles. From the program, I was sort of playing with the title Psychology of Freedom, which got in the program. Then I thought of Out of Our Minds, and both got printed. So, but both are fine. I thought what I'd do is I talk for a while, put out some ideas, but we'll have plenty of time for discussion, questions, interaction, and maybe do some actual exercises of one form or another, some meditation or something. But we'll see how it goes. But let me talk for a while about... Sorry, what's on? So let me talk for a while just a little about setting the stage. I think like talking is creating the field, the arena within which we can then explore questions and discussions. So when I called it out of our minds, I was actually thinking of two things, two meanings of out of our minds. The first being, when you say somebody is, that person's just out of their mind, what are they doing? Meaning crazy. We talk someone being out of their mind, being crazy. And it strikes me that, we're pretty crazy, basically. We don't like to think of ourselves as crazy, but if you just look at the way human beings act, interact, the way we approach the world, and we like to think of ourselves as, the most intelligent species on this planet. But what happens when the most intelligent species realizes that it's destroying its own habitat, and if it continues doing this, it's probably going to not be here in, who knows, 50 years, whatever, who knows what time. But it's clear we cannot go on living as we are, consuming resources, polluting the oceans, the atmosphere, the land. We can't continue doing that. It's absolutely obvious. And yet we continue doing it. Is that intelligent? That seems pretty crazy. We seem out of our minds in that respect. People say, oh, well, we don't have 100% proof yet that the greenhouse effect is actually occurring. If you're driving round a bend at night on a dark road, do you wait for 100% proof that there's a car coming the other way before you, take precautions? That's how crazy we can get collectively. Or individually. An area where I think we get quite crazy as individuals is in our relationships, our personal relationships, our intimate relationships. They're guaranteed to bring up just about everything, every bit of craziness that we have in us that we need to work on. We can all be nice and enlightened and all that nice stuff on our own, but put two of us together for a few months and it soon all starts coming out. Just one thing that's crazy in our relationships. As I would say, every one of us, every single human being, we want certain fundamental things. We want to be more at peace. We want to feel okay. We want to be loved. Those sorts of things. Each and every one of us wants that. What happens in relationships? If one person feels slightly hurt or aggrieved or unloved in some way, it's very easy to fall into the pattern of, well, I'm going to get my own back in some way, or I'm going to, people clam up, they stop communicating, or if you feel attacked, you attack back. Often it's very subtle. People can be very nice and sweet on the surface, but underneath there's those little digs getting at each other. And when you look at it, I see this time and time again. I see it in myself. That what we actually start doing is we try to hurt each other. We don't like to own up to the fact we're trying to hurt each other, but that's what happens. We try to just do little things and actually say, if you actually were nice to me and started loving me properly, I wouldn't do this. So I'm going to keep on hurting you until you change your mind and really do the sort of things I want you to do. And the other person is doing exactly the same thing. I'm going to keep on getting at you until you really do what I want you to do. And so you've got two people, both of whom are looking for love, peace, feel okay, both of them withholding that from each other in this crazy idea that if I withhold it, the other person will give it to me. You see the same thing on international levels, where the Cold War was a perfect example. We'll make you scared and then you'll stop making us scared. Or terrorism is just another perfect example. I mean, terrorism is an extreme form of just making the other side feel fear. And that's what we do in all our relationships. Very often we instill fear, when actually what we want is the opposite. I think something all the great teachers have said is, give the other person what they want, which is the same as you want. It's the golden rule. Do unto others as they would do unto you. And yet part of our craziness is we do unto others the exact opposite of what we would have done unto ourselves, in this strange belief that it'll work. And it never does. I mean, the Buddha said it perfectly. The Buddha said, one of his definitions of right speech, he said, if you can't say something to somebody in such a way that they feel good on hearing it, that they feel loved and appreciated when they hear it, then shut up. He didn't quite, he said it in Pali, whatever the Pali equivalent of shut up is. Basically it said, if you can't say something in such a way that the other person actually feels better, feels loved as a result of your saying that, then don't say anything. He actually said, retain noble silence until you have worked out how to say it. It isn't a cop-out. It isn't saying, oh, I've got something difficult to say and I don't know how to say it without upsetting you, so I'm just going to keep quiet and ignore it. It's saying, actually, work out how can you say it in such a way that other people feel good. So that's another part of our craziness, that we actually do the opposite of what we actually want. And all this craziness, whether it's to do with the environment, our relationships, it's in us all. I mean, just because I'm standing up here, speaking, and you're all down there, that doesn't mean I'm any different, or I'm special, or half enlightened, or 1/10 enlightened, or nothing at all. I'm, to put it crudely, as full of shit as any of you, so. I just happen to write about it. It's in all of us. Just as the good is in all of us, so is the bad, the stuff we need to work on. It's so easy to look and say, they have to change. The world is in a mess. People need to change. They need to raise their consciousness. We look around, we put it off onto them. They need to change. The only person I really have responsibility for is myself. And that's a big enough responsibility. That's a hard enough job, just dealing with my own consciousness, becoming a better, more compassionate person myself. And I think that's true of all of us. So what we really need is, how do we do that ourselves? How do we awaken ourselves? How do we step out of the craziness which is sort of hypnotized into us? I think more or less from the day we're born, we're hypnotized into various belief systems which lead us to behave in crazy ways. So I believe it's our responsibility for each of us to look at how do we do that? How do we awaken ourselves? Or how do we free ourselves? And that's really the language I want to use today, is talk about it as liberation. Indian teaching is often called Jiva Mukti, the liberated self. How do we liberate ourselves? Because freedom, I think freedom is another one of these things that we all want freedom. We all want to be free, or more free. And in our culture, we've got wonderful material external freedoms, which we've worked for. And political freedoms, freedom of speech, well, you did have it in this country till recently, but freedom of travel, freedom to live, freedom to come here. I mean, all of you here have the material freedom to actually travel, to come here, to take the time, to be able to afford it. That's an incredible freedom that only 17% of the population of the planet have. Only 17% have the actual time left over after they've done all their stuff of just supporting themselves to actually do other things. So we have many freedoms, but they're all external freedoms, and technology has given us many of these freedoms. But when it comes to the mind, I think very often we're not free at all there. I mean, I look at myself, just how trapped I can become in my thinking. I mean, the fears that go on, the little fears of what might happen tomorrow, the next day, 2 minutes' time. Fear so constrains the mind. I don't know if you ever feel that, but when you're in a situation and you're feeling fear, when you let go of the fear, there's this sense of like the mind just opens and feels this freedom and expansion. It's this incredible sensation, and you realize how the fear has just kept it in this tight, tense state. So I think a mind that's fearful is a mind that's really trapped. Or a mind that's judgmental. I mean, how we judge other people, often on the most crazy grounds. I mean, this person has the same accent as somebody I really disliked last year, or wears the same clothes or something. I mean, I'm being a little crass here, but it's those sorts of things. I mean, I notice myself judging someone because how they look reminds me of something, and I immediately put them into a category. I had an email from a blind person recently, which I actually put up on my site, who was saying how becoming blind was one of the greatest blessings he'd had. Because before that, he was always judging people on how they looked, their appearance, and realized how conditioned he was by their appearance. Being blind, he was freed of that judgment. He could actually respond to the being of the person much better. I actually had an experience, some years back. I was doing what's called a blind walk, where you're blindfold, and then somebody who I didn't know led me for about, it was actually near here, it was down near Santa Fe, up a rocky gully for about a mile, and I couldn't see anything at all, helping me step over boulders and stones up this gully. I had no idea who this person was, anything about them whatsoever. All I knew was they were helping me navigate this rocky gully. And I just fell in love with that person. Not a word, not a sight, nothing, but just with that fact that I was cared for, there's this deep sense of love arose. Now, if I'd been seeing the person, that probably wouldn't have happened at all. All my judgments and things would have come in, but without that, I was just free to have that experience. Our desires, our wanting, our attachment, all the things we think, if only we had these things, life would be much better. They keep us trapped. How much of the time do we actually stop really enjoying what's happening in the present moment because we're thinking about how we'd like things to be in the future? In fact, as many teachers have said time and time again, if you're actually truly living in the present moment, there is no fear, there is no judgment, there is no worry. If you're truly in the present moment, you're at peace. What happens, though, is we start worrying about whether we're going to be at peace in 5 minutes' time, or 10 days' time, or 10 years' time. And by definition, a mind that is worrying cannot be a mind that is at peace. So we go through our whole lives, and eventually you die, and they put on your gravestone, "Rest in peace." Like, finally, finally you're freed from life. You can be at peace. But as Meher Baba said, put it very neatly, Meher Baba said, don't worry, be happy. To be happy, stop worrying. We don't need to worry most of the time. if I look at my own thinking, I'd probably be better off without 90% of it. Probably about 98% of it, actually. But I go thinking. I'm this great thinking machine. Thinking's a great thing to have, great asset. It's what's made us different from the other creatures, allows us to plan, allows us to do many, many things. But it also keeps us trapped. We don't need to be thinking the whole time. A great exercise for me on this is driving. Because I don't need to be thinking when I'm driving, most of the time. What I need to do is better control the car and keep it going straight, etc., at a reasonable speed. That doesn't require me thinking to myself in words about da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And usually whatever I'm thinking when I'm driving is nothing about the actual act of driving. It's like, well, did I say the right thing yesterday? Was that good? I wonder if, God, that person was really a pain. And now when I get there, I must remember to do this. I've got to phone somebody or other. And, there's a field of cows over there. That's interesting. This the chatter that goes on. Driving is a wonderful place to meditate, not to close your eyes and, I'm not recommending that, but just to stop thinking. We don't need to think. And when you do that, and there's various ways I do it, but the simplest way is actually really works, is when I notice myself going off thinking about something, I just say stop. And it's amazing, it does. It just say stop, it stops. And there's other voice which comes along and says, well, wasn't that interesting? You actually said stop and it stopped thinking. It's like, so then you catch that one, you say, got you, stop. And this other little voice goes, But you do that enough and it's like it gradually just settles down. And then you realize, there's all this wonderful scenery to see. You start taking in what's happening. And I think I drive much safer in that mode of consciousness than when I'm driving down the road and I'm half seeing what's happening and my mind is somewhere else going through all this stuff. So that's why I was saying this morning, I think the great experiment that is in all the traditions is to stop thinking. How do we stop thinking? How do we take the mind out of this incessant chatter? See, if we didn't have language, like I don't think dogs think like we think. Because I don't think dogs don't have a complex, symbolic, semantic language like we do. I mean, they may have codes in terms of barks and sign language, but they don't get wrapped up in all this stuff, this voice in their head talking to themselves. I don't think a dog lies there sort of barking to itself inside its mind about what's going on. And you watch a dog, it seems, leave a dog alone, it just seems to lie down and enjoy whatever it's doing. Or a cat, they don't start sort of saying, God, I'm bored, I'm going to do something, what's going to happen when, what's going to happen tomorrow, and what's going to happen to the stock market, and all this stuff. They're just in the state of the natural mind. And in one way, I think a lot of what we do in our meditative work is getting back to dog consciousness. Except the difference is that, I'm talking about getting back to the natural mind, the mind before verbal language got laid on top of it, and we got so caught up with all the verbal stuff that we just lose awareness of what's going on. I think the difference between us and a dog is when we stop thinking, instead of just being there, lying on the rug, enjoying it, we actually stop thinking and we're aware of ourselves. We're aware of consciousness. We become self-aware in that sense. So that's the other sense of getting out of our minds, is getting out of our thinking minds, leaving thinking behind. So let's just look a bit about how I see that arises, this whole thinking thing. Why is it that we do think so much when we don't need to? How do we get caught up in this incessant chatter that goes on inside the head? I assume you all have this, right? Those of you who don't can just float in the bliss. I think it comes back to a fundamental belief system that's hypnotized into us almost from the day we're born. And it's hypnotized through our education, through our parents, through the media. And this belief system says, It's even deeper than a belief system. It's the conditioning we have in our culture. It says, if you're not happy, if you're not at peace, if you're not enjoying things, do something about it. The basic premise is, if you're suffering, if you're dissatisfied, if you're not at peace, there's something wrong with your external circumstances, and they need changing. You need to do something, go somewhere, find something, buy something, talk to someone, whatever it is. The belief system says, go out there and sort it out. Now, I think that was probably valid in the past, and still is valid if the primary reason you're not happy is because you're suffering physically. If you go back 200 years before the Industrial Revolution, if we weren't at peace, if we were unhappy, it was probably because we were starving, sick, cold in the winter, insufficient clothing, shelter, those sorts of things. If that's the reason you're unhappy, you're not at peace, then you do need to do something about it. You need to feed yourself, to drink some water, to put some more clothes on, whatever it is. If the source of your suffering is physical, do something physical. In our culture today, well, for us in this room, for us, the more affluent members of the global culture, we've got those things taken care of. We've just been eaten. We didn't have to go and capture our food to eat it or grow it. It's there. We've got the right air conditioning, more or less. The physical needs are taken care of most of the time. But if we're still not at peace, if we're still not happy with ourselves, still don't feel okay inside, this belief system says, well, there must be something else we need to do. Get some new clothes, get a new jacket or something, or go to the movies, or go and get yourself a really nice meal. Not necessarily a nutritious meal, but a really nice meal. How often do we eat not because it's what our bodies need, but it's what our taste buds would enjoy? We eat very often just to keep the taste buds entertained, and cooks are very, very good at designing good entertainment for the taste buds. But it's good to think if you find the lovely right meal, and then you feel this wonderful sense of, it's great. And then the next day is, where can I get as good a meal as that again? We get caught in that trap. So this belief system leads to no end of desiring, wanting things to be different than they are. It stops us actually experiencing the present moment as it is. The belief system keeps on saying, if you actually did something about this, you would feel better. It doesn't recognize that you can feel better just by accepting what is, which is what all the great teachers have said. If you just accept the present moment, you can be at peace. This belief system says, go out, do something, find something new, go to the movies. And as I say, it's hypnotized into us. I know it was for me. My parents brought me up into that way of thinking. And I remember, it was in my mid-20s, and I'd just gone home to visit my parents, and I was just leaving home. I was about to get into the car to drive away, and my mother said to me, her parting words were, don't you think it's about time you got a job? You've been to university, you've got all these degrees, you've been to India, you've traveled around the world, you've done all these things. Don't you think now it's about time you settled down and got a job? And I was still in my more reactionary phase, so I said, why? And she said, well, yeah, so you can start earning nice money, and you'll probably want to get a house and furnish it. And I kept on asking why, and she'd come up with reasons to why these things would be good. And I just kept on saying why, and finally, in sort of exasperation, she broke down, well, not broke down, but exasperation, she said, well, so that you can be happy, of course. And I looked at her and said, well, aren't I happy? And I remember she looked at me and she said, well, yes, I suppose you are. And that was the end of it. From then on, whenever I see her, she says, as long as you're happy, that's the main thing. I still haven't had a job yet. But she says, as long as you're happy. Although she does worry whether I eat. I mean, it was her birthday 2 days ago, and I rang her here from the hotel just after I arrived. And she was asking how the flight was, etc. She said, did you eat anything on the plane? Did you get some food? So she still cares. So this is the belief system that runs our whole culture. I mean, advertising, all advertisers know this. My favorite advertisement, or don't we call them advertisements or something here, whatever it is, adverts, whatever the language. There's one outside Heathrow Airport. It's a car hire company, one of these small off-airport car hire companies. And it says, rent from us and be assured peace of mind. It's like, is this the new great spiritual teaching? Every advert, if you look at it and you decode it, it says, buy this product, this service, whatever it is, and you will feel better. But the other side of it is, they actually instill a little bit of suffering in you. Because the ad says, you can't feel perfectly good about yourself right now because you don't have this thing that we're trying to sell you. So they're actually very gently instilling a little bit of dissatisfaction. And this struck me recently when Apple produced the new iMac, the nice thing with the floating screen and everything. I'm sure you've all seen the pictures of it. My assistant, who loves Macs, when she saw that, she broke down and started crying. Because she wanted one. Not because she thought the design was awful and it made her so sad. It was like, And I was actually speaking at the Apple Macworld thing in San Francisco the next day. And I brought this up to Apple. Here they have this wonderful machine, and Steve Jobs has, I'm sure, got the very best marketing, advertising people. And now millions of people all over the world are suffering a tiny bit because they haven't got the new iMac. And that's what happens. And then when we do get it, we go and buy the new iMac and we feel wonderful, or whatever it is, the new car, the new jacket, the new credit card, whatever it is they're selling us. You feel good. But it isn't the thing that's made you good. That's what we think. We think it's having this thing made you good, feel good. It's not. You built up this temporary little bit of suffering and dissatisfaction because you didn't have it. And so when you do the thing or get it, that self-created dissatisfaction evaporates and you just return to the normal state of feeling good. But you think it's because you bought the computer. And this is what happens. We create suffering for ourselves. And that's what the Buddha realized after all his seeking. And I think there's a lot of parallels between what the Buddha went through and what's happening in our culture at the current time. And we all know the story of the Buddha, the classic story of how he started off as a rich prince, wasn't called the Buddha then, and he had everything he could want on a material plane in those days. And then he realized there was still suffering. And he saw outside his palace there was sickness, there was poverty, there was death. And he even saw, his family was still, although they had all the richness, they were still suffering. So he set out, his mission was to find out how to end suffering. Well, it's often translated as suffering. It's more, the better word is probably unhappiness, dissatisfactoriness. And he went out and he studied with various yogis and gurus and teachers. And he did lots of different meditations and yogas and nearly starved himself to death at some stage. And then finally, after 6 years of this, traveling through the forest, studying with various people, trying everything, he sat down and decided just to be and meditate underneath this tree. And then it dawned on him. And so the story goes, some children who were bringing food to him each day said to him, "You look different today. What's happened? Something's different about you." He says, "I've awakened. I've realized what it is. I've awakened. And they said, oh, okay, we'll call you the Awakened One, which in Pali, the language at the time, is Buddha. That was where the name came from. Some children just said, we'll call you the Awakened One, the Buddha. And then he gave his first discourse, which is known as the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism. And the Four Noble Truths, put very simply, the first noble truth, dukkha, is often translated as suffering. But I think it's better translated as unsatisfactoriness. That we all experience unsatisfactoriness in our lives. Things aren't satisfactory. We may not have physical suffering, but things aren't. If only things were different, life would be better. That's unsatisfactoriness. The second thing he realized was that is self-created. We create the unsatisfactoriness because we desire things to be different. If you desire something to be different than it is, naturally you create the unsatisfactoriness. So to see that suffering was self-created through our desiring, our craving, our attachments. And then the third noble truth was to realize it didn't have to be this way. We could actually change our minds, change our thinking. We could look at things in different ways, in such a way that we don't create suffering for ourselves. And then the fourth noble truth was the eightfold path of things to do in your life to begin to change your approach, how you think, how you behave to other people, so that you don't continue in this vicious cycle. And I think that is the key realization that comes up in many traditions, that to realize that we create this dissatisfaction for ourselves. An example I often use when I'm teaching in corporations, where I don't use any spiritual language whatsoever. I try to keep it right down to ordinary, everyday stuff to relate to people whose main concerns are, paying their kids' school bills and the mortgage and meeting their quarterly targets, who if I started talking anything about spiritual or even mentioned Buddha or anything, they just throw me out or run a mile. But I think the same principles apply. And so I usually ask, how many people get stressed by traffic jams? How many people get upset by traffic jams, being stuck in a traffic jam? And most people usually admit they do. I mean, how many people here get stressed by traffic jams? Yeah, okay. Quite a few of you. The rest have been to one of my lectures already, so no. The truth is, that's not true. That's an illusion we have. We think the traffic jam is causing us stress. The traffic jam isn't actually injecting adrenaline into your bloodstream. The power of a traffic jam is to stop cars moving, and that's it. That's its limit. If you're feeling upset and angry and stressed, it's because the voice in your head, this internal thinking dialogue voice, the chit-chat that goes on, is saying, this is not good for me. It's the voice of fear again. It's saying, I'm going to be late. If I'm late, I'm not going to be in the sort of circumstances that will bring me peace. I'm going to be late for the appointment, I should be embarrassed, I'll lose the deal, or I'll be late home and my partner will be angry, or whatever it is. But the logic goes, I'm going to be delayed, I'm going to be late. That means bad things are going to happen to me. I'm not going to be at peace sometime in the future because of this traffic jam. And whenever the brain goes through a fear response, it is hardwired to deal with fear by pumping up the blood pressure, quickening the breathing, tensing the muscles, focusing the eyes, the classic stress response. When there's nobody actually attacking you in the traffic jam, you don't actually need this in the traffic jam. There's nobody attacking you. You haven't got to actually get ready to fight or anything, but you're going through that response. Somebody else could be sitting in exactly the same situation, exactly the same traffic jam, and the voice in their head can be saying, this is wonderful. This is the sort of situation I've been wishing for all day long. And I've got nobody coming in with their problems for me to solve. I haven't got to sit through any boring meetings. I've got no computer beeping at me telling me I've got mail. For once, I can sit back, I can relax, I've got no pressures on me, I can just meditate, listen to music, whatever, just the air conditioning. This is the sort of situation I've wanted all day long. So you've got two totally different reactions. One person going one step closer to a heart attack, the other person one step closer to enlightenment. And the difference is nothing to do with what's going on out there. The difference is purely what the voice in your head is saying. And I think this is one of the fundamental truths, that we always have a choice over how we see things, how we respond to things. We can always change our mind. I think that's what Christ was saying when, you know, that phrase you often see plastered up, sinners repent, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. If you look back to what that actually means in the Greek, it's quite fascinating. You know, we think sinners repent, the kingdom of heaven is at hand means those of you who've done wrong, you know, get down on your knees because any moment now the day of judgment's coming, and if you haven't said you're sorry, then that's it. The word sin is actually derived from archery, and it means to miss the center of the target, to miss the bullseye. So a sinner is somebody who's missed what they are aiming for. And what we are all aiming for in life is to feel better, to be more at peace, to feel love. It's those sorts of things. So we're looking to feel better, we're looking to be more at peace. That's what we're all aiming at. A sinner is somebody who aimed for that and missed. So they aimed to do that, but they didn't get that. Whatever they did, missed, and they ended up suffering in some way. That's a sinner. Repent means change. The Latin actually, repent, means to change your thinking. The Greek metanoia means to change your mind, go beyond the mind. So somebody who has tried to be more at peace but not found it, change your thinking, because the kingdom of heaven, what you're looking for, is not out there in all the circumstances, it's within you. So turn within to find it. So that, I think, is one of the universal teachings, that don't try and find peace in the external world. It's within yourself. And so the question becomes, how do you find it in yourself? And that comes back to, how do we get out of our minds? How do we stop thinking? So, what else I want to say on that before we do something? Yeah, just one other aspect I'd just like to mention here, because I think it's a really important thing. This mode of interaction that says I have to get the right things, have things be the right way in order to be at peace. It actually stops us getting everything we want. I mean, it stops us, as I say, it stops us being at peace. Because a mind that's worrying about whether the future is going to be the right way, or whether you said the right thing yesterday, can't be a mind that's at peace. It also leads to, we get into, let's say, judgments about other people, grievances. And we start feeling somebody did something wrong, somebody did something or said something that stopped us finding peace. We put the blame on them. The truth is, nobody ever made you unhappy. That's the truth. What actually happened was, people said or did things which you responded to in such a way that you experienced unhappiness. That's the truth. But they didn't actually make you unhappy. You did that yourself over how you experienced them. But we believe that someone else did something and made us unhappy. We fall into that trap. And then we hold grievances about them, which means we continue days, sometimes weeks, months after the fact, still making ourselves unhappy over what happened. And this came home to me many years ago when I was involved in a business partnership. And one of the people in the partnership was meant to be doing some marketing, and I thought there was something fishy going on, something that didn't quite make sense. And he wasn't being completely honest. And I challenged him about this. And I said, what's really going on, And he said, don't believe anything anybody else tells you. Trust me, I know what's happening, it's all okay. So he said trust him, so 95% of me did trust him, the other 5% put him on hold. About 3 months later, it all came out, and he hadn't been telling the truth all along, and a whole series of unfortunate things happened. And I felt angry at the time. And then I noticed how weeks later I'd be going to sleep at night and I'd think of him and what he'd done to me. And the thing that was really bad was not that he'd lied, but he'd promised me he was telling me the truth and then lied. That was what really got me. If someone promises you they're telling you the truth, then they should do. And that's why we make such a big thing of perjury. We accept that people lie, but when they promise you they're telling you the truth, then they really should do. And if I thought about him, that would stop me going to sleep for the next 2 hours. I'd go, and it takes about 2 hours for me to go, and settle down again. Then I realized, as far as I knew, this guy could be dead. In fact, I was wishing he were. Maybe my wishes had come true. I didn't know what he was doing, but he wasn't upsetting me at all. He wasn't even near me. He wasn't communicating with me. I was the one who was doing it, but believing that he had done it. That's another way we just stop ourselves being at peace with grievances. I met someone recently who walked into the kitchen of a friend's house and was saying, I really can't forgive this person for what they did. And my friend said, oh, I'm so sorry. That must be so hard for you. Just to bear that grudge in yourself. It stops us being in the present moment. If we're thinking, I would like to bet that almost every one of your thoughts, almost without exception, is never about the present moment. Probably 2/3 of them about the future, what's going to happen, what should you do, what should you say, should I scratch my ear or whatever it is. Or they're about what I just did or what happened in the past. Even occasionally you do have thoughts about the present moment, but even those are usually distracting from the present moment. And I was recently sitting in this situation which was absolutely wonderful, and I found myself thinking to myself how wonderful this was. I thought I was thinking about the present moment, and a friend was with me, and I was describing it to him, and I said, this is just perfect. And I was describing all the reasons why the present moment was just perfect. And he, being a little wiser than me, just turned and said, even better to experience it. It's like, there I go again. Eckhart Tolle says, if you're thinking, you can't be in the present moment. And I think there's a lot of truth there. If you're thinking, you can't be in the present moment. So that's another reason we need to get out of our minds, to actually get back into just experiencing what is. And it also stops us finding love. A lot of what we call love is, I think, a rather neurotic behavior pattern. I'm not talking about, real spiritual love, but so often what happens is we treat other people like we treat our cars or whatever it is, as objects to give us what we want. So we meet somebody and we say, you look just like I think the perfect person should look like, and you think the way the perfect person should think, and you have the right sense of humor and the right bank balance and whatever it is, and all these things we list off. You all have this list of the perfect person, and you get this sort of 98 out of 100 match, and it's like, you're the one who's going to make me happy. And we get into all this stuff, don't leave me, I couldn't be happy without you. We project onto the other person. We make them responsible for how we feel inside. The Course in Miracles talks about that as special love. You make the other person special. And you don't love them as for them, for their soul, for their beingness, for their essence. You love them for all this superstructure stuff, all the stuff that's special about them. And it points out the problem with that sort of love is it quickly turns into, special love quickly turns into special hate. Whereas, as soon as something you love about the person changes, they lose their sense of humor, or they don't like you quite so much, or whatever it is, it usually takes 3 to 6 months, and it switches round. And all these reasons you thought the person was so wonderful, they're becoming niggles and irritations. But it's exactly the same dynamic, just being played a different way. It's that same belief system that if only the world were right, I'd feel good. It means if only the other person's just the way I want them to be, I'll feel good. When the other person isn't the way I want them to be, then I feel bad. And then you get into all the little subtle manipulation, control stuff that goes on. I think love should be allowing another person to be as they are. But what so often happens is this little tiny controlling, whether it's withholding love or other things, to subtly manipulate other people. And control is one of the universal things that we get into when we get stuck in this mode of thinking. Because we want to keep the world the right way for us to be happy. So we get into all things, trying to be in control of our environment, rather than doing the opposite, which is just moving with the flow, moving with the change. But I know when I try to control things in my life, it never works out, not in the long term, not for long. I try to control things, situations, other people. But when I look back, everything of any significance, interest in my life that's ever happened, that's been important to me, happened despite my trying to control the world. Usually happened completely by some synchronicity, bumping into somebody or picking up something, reading something, whatever. Switching on the television at some moment. My whole life changed once I just switched on the television at some moment. Nothing to do with me trying to make things happen. That trying to make things happen, I'm slowly learning, doesn't really work. Life seems to work by synchronicity, the magic in life. So how do we do this? How do we get out of our heads? How are we doing for time? 2:45. Well, before we do it, let's pause and see what questions there are, discussions, and then we'll do some practical work on it as well. So let's and if questions, can you use the mic? But you need to use the mic. This is not to embarrass you, but this is so that it can be recorded. And we have the sound.
Hello?
We got sound? Of course, this is assuming there are any questions. Yep. Yes, you can use this mic.
I'm interested in the word about sin. It seems like St. Paul's version of hamartia talked about missing the mark, using his athletic competition kind of motif throughout running the race and that sort of thing. It seems like in the Aramaic, Jesus used a word, I don't know Aramaic, but in the text I read, talked about sin being not fruitful or not productive, not nourishing. And I'm wondering how, in your perspective, hamartia compares with that unfruitfulness.
Yeah. I don't know Aramaic either, so I can't comment on that. But I would say it fits into the same general pattern. Fruitfulness, what is the fruit that we really want? And I think it comes back to the fact, underneath everything, whatever we do, the fruit that we're looking for is actually an internal fruit. That's our fundamental motivation. Consciousness wants to feel good. It's one of the fundamental laws of consciousness. It doesn't want to suffer. It wants to feel good. So that is the ultimate fruit, to actually be more at peace in ourselves. And then I think what we do is we mistake the means to that, the external means, to the fruits in themselves. And so we start, I don't think this is what Jesus or anybody meant, but I think that's what happens in our culture. We think the fruits are out there. So a fruitful action is one that achieves something out there. And we've missed the fact that although we've achieved something out there, we may not have actually given ourselves what we want. I think this is what happens so much of the time. This is why it's the same thing as missing the mark. The mark is is to be more at peace, to feel loved, whatever it is, to be more free, and we miss it. I think that's the same thing as unfruitful action. Yeah. Hi.
I'm interested in your response to an age-old question.
To which question?
An old question.
Yeah.
And the question is, how do we balance the idea that if we're truly in present time and we are not attached to having things be different in the external, how do we deal with the problem that you mentioned at the beginning, that we're destroying our environment?
Yeah. Good. Yeah, thank you. Remember, I didn't say we should be without thinking altogether. I said I'd probably be better off without 90% of my thinking. There are times when thinking is really important, when we need to work out something, to make decisions about what to do. Then we should be thinking. What I was saying was a lot of the time it's unnecessary chatter that goes on. And I'm not saying we shouldn't try to improve the external circumstances. There's maybe a lot of things we can do to improve the external circumstances for ourselves, for other people, for other creatures on the planet. I think that's really important. But we have to, and when we do that, then we have to really focus on what needs to be done. A lot of the time I see people doing that, but they're caught up so much in the fear or the anger that often I think we can't see the best things to do. So I think a mind that is clearer, more at peace in itself, I think it's going to be a mind that's better able to discern the most effective course of action, whether it's on the international stage, our local social stage, whatever it is. So I'm not saying at all we shouldn't engage in the world. I think we should engage in the world. And that again, I think, is part of all the great traditions. I mean, the Buddha said the enlightened one doesn't stop until he's seen the enlightenment of all beings. And I would say, it's not just about being at peace in ourselves. There may be many things we can do to lessen the suffering of other beings on the planet. And I think that is admirable activity. What I'm really talking about is beginning to cut away the unnecessary stuff that we get engaged in our life that doesn't really help us at all. So I think what you bring up, and I would just say that's great stuff, and do it and keep it up. It's really important. Yeah.
Which naturally brings my question. You call us all to mind about thinking, which is a beautiful thing for us all to see here together reflecting. However, to now go the next level, don't we need to organize that thinking so that we're not just thinking, so that we're reasoning, so that we are puzzling out our problems and working with them?
Yep.
So, okay, so today as a group, we have already group mind.
Yep.
Now what would you like to focus on?
Doing some of it. Stepping out of our minds.
Good.
Getting out of our minds. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Will do. I just want to give a bit of space for questions before we did that. Yes, okay, we will do, soon.
My question is that of a writer asking for technique. When you're writing a book, are you able to do it in the present moment without thinking? And if so, how?
Sometimes, and those times are magic. It's an interesting thing here. The best writings I do are not when I sit and think and try to work out what to say and why this sentence isn't working and all that sort of planning stuff. I do all that. I mean, that's necessary. That's where some thinking is necessary, the organization of ideas. What I'm saying is, think when we need to think, but don't think when we don't need to think. Right. From the other place, I mean, it comes... There are various techniques I use. One thing is meditation, is always important. Just meditating for me just means letting the mind become quiet or stilling the mind. And usually after I've done that, I find there'll be a bubbling upflow of ideas, that isn't me thinking it out, it's just a bubbling upflow of ideas. And what I have to do is record it. So I'm just the recorder then. And so I just scribble the ideas down as they come. But it's not channeling or anything like that. It's not coming from some external being. It's coming from deeper within me. But I've taken off that normal thinking layer. It's stopping me actually access the stuff that's underneath that really wants to bubble up. And when I notice I'm stuck in writing, it's usually because I'm trying to make it happen. And so I have, things I'll do, like there's a question I'll ask myself, if I'm working on a book, like, what does the book want here? Which takes it out of me and my deliberation. What does the book want? And see what comes up. Or if I'm getting, frustrated, writer's frustration, just to step back and look at the frustration, just experience the frustration. What is the frustration around? Because usually I think frustration is a really important part of the creative process. We tend to think not. We think creativity is coming up with great ideas. We think, if you're blocked and the ideas aren't coming, you're feeling frustrated, then that's not being creative. For me, that is. And it's about listening to the frustration, feeling it, seeing what it's saying, and usually, again, out of that comes something completely different. And another question I use, which we may come on to later as an exercise, is just asking, is there another way of looking at this? Just asking that of myself, is there another way of looking? But all of these things are, in a way, turning it over from my conscious deliberation, turning it over to something deeper inside myself and seeing what bubbles up.
I wanted to get back to a comment you made about nobody can hurt us, and it's like if I understand it correctly, it's our perception of what was done to us, which I totally agree with 95% of the time. But I'm trying to reconcile that with the fact that I'm a psychotherapist and I specialize in work with children. And many of the children I've worked with have been brutally abused by adults.
Yeah.
And I recognize the validity of what you're saying because I've seen in my own life, I've certainly had the experience you described, staying up and brooding and getting into that victim mentality over something that happened 30, 40 years ago and the damage that does.
Yeah.
But how do you reconcile that taking responsibility for your reactions versus the reality that sometimes the things that we do can have very brutal effects upon other people?
Yeah. I think, the other side I didn't mention at all is, as much as we need to take responsibility for our own reactions, we also need to take responsibility for our actions. Now, if I said, something mean to you, if you're this perfectly wise, enlightened being, you would just be there, it would wash off you, and it would have no effect on you. But if I suspect you aren't a perfectly enlightened being, then I have a responsibility to shape what I say and do in order to minimize the suffering that's going to cause you. So it's a two-way thing. I have a responsibility not to act or behave in a way which you might react to in a way that creates more pain and suffering. Now, with a child, or with anybody for that respect, but I think what I'm talking about is an adult reaction. I don't think most children would have that awareness to be able to step outside of it. They would be caught in it immediately, and so the responsibility is almost totally on the person who is doing the action, because the child yet hasn't got that ability to reflect. And so it's not a two-way thing, it's a one-way thing there.
I can just make one more comment too. I guess I really believe that part of transcending an emotion is being able to first feel that emotion, but not staying stuck in that emotion.
Yeah.
And I guess I've been concerned about some of the stuff I've seen in New Age circles about judging an emotion. You know, I mean, like you're not allowed to be angry or you're not allowed to be afraid, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think, for me, it's about allowing those experiences. It's those things, when we hold them down, that's the problem. I know for me, yeah. Okay, let's just take one more or so question, if there are any. Was this or two? Okay, and then we'll move on.
So Peter, most of the time I experience, when you speak, that I experience what you say is what's true for me too. But when you said that consciousness is motivated to feel good, that's not my experience. My experience is that that if you equate consciousness with who I am, actually, that consciousness is often motivated to drag me through very uncomfortable situations in order to help me understand that in the domain of phenomena, as the Bhagavad Gita says, name and fame and shame, gain and loss and blame are all the same. Mm-hmm. They're all inside of phenomenality. And it's been my own personal experience that it's usually only at those times that I am being egoically humiliated, blamed, challenged, decimated, blown apart, that I actually have any true opening to get what it is that I am beyond my, as Eckhart Tolle would say, tendency to reinforce my false identity.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, and when I said the motivation of consciousness is to feel better, I mean in the overall. I mean, there's many things we deliberately do that cause temporary pain or suffering, or things that we not even deliberately, but unconsciously allow to happen. But I would say, but working through that stuff, the long-term goal is to be more free of that. So you may go through the working out of that stuff.
But in the conversation about freedom, my own experience of freedom is the discovery that who I actually am in the middle of the most painful situations. It just comes to mind a dream. I was at a workshop with a being that I felt was very awake, and I had a dream. And in the dream, I was on a medieval torture rack, being tortured to death. And I woke up in that condition and started laughing. And the torturer came and demanded to know why I was laughing. And I said, because I've just seen how free God is, because I saw that you, my torturer, were my mother in another lifetime. And that God is free enough to use that which soul connection, that bond of another soul that I was mothered by, to kill this ego. And it totally shattered in me the sense of conditioned self that couldn't, because conditioning said, this is right, this is wrong, threw me outside the box. And I think that's when the universe got very interesting.
Okay, thanks. Okay, let's. Do you have a question, or you're just sitting there?
My question has to do with action versus contemplation. And I'd just like you to comment about the quandary that I'm in about whether to take action or whether to contemplate it into being, and what we can do in a consciousness conference to create what we want through contemplation versus action.
I don't think there's any simple answer to that. I think in any situation, all you can do, all I can do, I know, is to weigh things up and do whatever I consider is the most appropriate for my current level of understanding and awareness. So I don't think there's anything you can say generally about that for any situation, but I think when you're faced with an individual action, then I think do you actually go out and do something? You're deciding more whether to work on the inner level. Is that what you mean by contemplation? Yeah. I think you just have to make those choices as they come along. I don't think there's any, for me, there's no black and white thing, but except to pause. Not to, I think we run towards the action. We're trained to do that. We run towards that more easily. So I'd say if there's anything, is just to pause and see what comes up inside yourself. And I had it was one of those great teaching moments for myself recently where I'd actually just come off quite a long meditation retreat. And as I got back into action, I would find myself, my thinking mind would say, do this. And every time I came up with what I thought I should do in the world, whatever it was, from big things to little things like making a phone call or whatever it was, I got physically, almost physically, thrown down into my seat, onto my sofa. It was weird. I just found myself staggering backwards, sitting down, and like my inner knowing was saying, wait, see what comes up. And what came up was, in every case, something different than I was about to do. And in every case, much more appropriate, much wiser than I was about to do. And this went on and on. Every time I was like, got to do that, it's like, phew. No, do this. Oh, thank you. Okay. So I would say that, before you act, pause and just feel within and see what impulse is coming up from within. Let's do a little meditation. How about that? Is lunch settled enough? You won't all go to sleep? If you do go to sleep, don't snore too loud, or neighbours, just nudge your person next to you. That'll wake them up. Of warming the room up? Any chance of warming the room up? No one. Has anybody got a spare sweater or something, or wrap? Anyone got a spare blanket? That'll do it, yes. Let's warm the person up, not the room. Yeah, okay. Any offers? Great, thank you. just thinking what to do. Yeah. This is a sort of meditation. Which gets us out of our thinking a little bit. So what I'd like to do is just sit comfortably, and we'll do this with the eyes closed. But is it even possible to take the lights down for a little while? Particularly that big one on me. So just close your eyes and just take a minute or two in whatever way you feel comfortable with, just to settle down, to let the body relax. Just to let go of any tensions that might be there. Or if you're not quite comfortable, take this moment just to adjust the body slightly to make sure you're really comfortable. And you'll probably find your mind drifting off onto thoughts. As that happens, that's fine, it will happen to everybody. Just come back to that, noticing how you know you are sitting here. What is it that tells you you are sitting here? The various sensations, experiences that you're having right now. As you do that, you may notice other sensations, other things going on in your body. Nothing is right, nothing is wrong, it's just noticing whatever there is. And now I'd like you to take a slightly deeper question. The question now is, how do you know you are alive? There's no right or wrong answers, but just what is there in your experience that shows you you are alive right now? Or to put it another way, what does it feel like right now to be alive? And just notice whatever comes. Some of the things might be surprising. Just notice whatever there is. What is that inner feeling of aliveness? How do you experience that in yourself? And when you find the mind has wandered off on something, just come back to that question. That awareness. Of just noticing that sense of inner vitality. And just see if that sense of aliveness is focused anywhere particular in your being. Is it all through your being, or is it stronger in some parts of your being? Don't analyze it, just notice whatever is. And just let your attention be absorbed in this. In this feeling of aliveness. And then just gradually let your attention return back to being in the room, become more aware of your physical body, maybe wiggle your toes or stretch your fingers. Become aware of your breathing. Become aware of your neighbours. And just become aware of the silence that is in the room. I don't know whether you noticed, but while we were doing that, there were 300 people in this room, and it was almost totally, absolutely silent, apart from the air conditioning. So we can bring the lights up again, slowly, within the legal limits, not producing too much shock to the nervous system. I'd like to just hear from a few people what your experiences were during that. Anybody like to share? Yes?
The longer I stayed in, I kept just losing large chunks of my body. I mean, it's like, do you know you have hands? No, there's big pieces missing. Just interesting.
And was it that you knew they were missing? You had no idea where they were? Was it that experience of like, where are my hands? Or
No, it's the awareness of any of these parts was gone, whereas normally you can,
feel them?
I mean, you can feel like the clothing on
Yeah.
and these things. It just, like there was a big hole. Just very peaceful, neat.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
I don't, oh boy. I'm not sure I'm here now, so
Oh, you're here now, okay. Don't worry.
I may need people to really ground me. This is a question that's been bothering me from yesterday when I went into a trance, and I never quite recovered. And then when we just did this, like I didn't know if I was alive. I mean, the truth is, I don't know the answer. I mean, I felt like it didn't really, I guess on some level it really didn't matter, but on some level I was a spiritual force. I was here, but I don't know where here was, and I could have not been alive. Except the only way I really know I was alive is you say move your fingers and then I come back.
Mhm.
But the reason I'm bringing this up is, I almost feel depressed about it because I never came back totally to my grounded self from yesterday. And it's doing something to me, so I needed to say that.
Okay. Yeah, maybe talk about, I'm not quite sure what happened yesterday, but have you taken some walks outside?
Yes, lots of
Didn't help. Okay.
It helps, then I go back to, I guess I need to be somewhere, but, I mean, the interesting thing about your question isn't so much my personal thing, it's just that it really doesn't matter.
Yeah, okay. And the point about that question was not to work out how, the facts of why you're alive, but it's just to tune into the aliveness and the being here in your body. How many people noticed that while they were doing that, when you're in touch with that thinking stopped? Yeah, yeah. So you really had that contrast between thinking, stopping, and then the thinking would start up again, and the automaticness would start up, and you'd be drifting off. Then you'd come back to that feeling of aliveness for your body, and the thinking would stop again. And that's one of the main values of that exercise, just to experience that contrast of how you can just be there, aware, still, and not thinking, just by experiencing and then going off. Yes? Could you mind using the mic? I know it's a pain. Okay, go on then.
The last couple of weeks, there's been some sadnesses that I've been feeling, living through, working through. And when I went down, it was like there was that sadness, and it was like go deeper, and just this incredible joy. Wow.
Okay, so you're just saying there's an incredible joy behind the sadness and things.
The sadness was,
Yeah.
and the joy was just there.
Yeah, yeah. And this is, again, you look at all the great teachings, they say when you get behind that stuff, what is underneath everything is joy, peace, love. Swami Muktananda said, love is the secret sensation of the self. I think that's wonderful. It's like the secret sensation. We don't normally notice it because it's covered over. All the time the mind is, or even if you're caught up in sadness and things, anything of that level, just covering up what is under there. And when that quietens down, then you begin to notice what is there underneath.
Yeah, and it's like all of this up here is ephemeral. It comes and goes. But this here is.
Yeah, and it's always there, but we don't notice it. Yeah. Yes.
At the beginning, I noticed that I was sitting because, like that went off. And when you asked how I noticed that I is still alive or that I think, then I noticed that was the breath, my breathing.
Yes.
And then the breathing went together. It was kind of a breathing. It was kind of the breath of the world. It was in harmony with something which was, together with me, and there was a great connection to something.
Mm-hmm. Good. Sounds good. Thank you. Yes? Would you mind, if you're standing up, you can get this.
To my great surprise, the minute thinking stopped, imagination sprang to life, and I had an extraordinary experience of the imagination rising up, and I won't go into it, but the stopping of the thinking awakened the imagination, and I knew I was alive.
Great, yeah. And this is the thing, just to experience how much we do get stuck and held back by the thinking. Yeah.
I just would like to share the incredible peace that I felt and joy. And I don't even know when I stopped thinking. It just all of a sudden, it's just peace. Thank you.
Thank you. How many other people felt something like that? Deep joy, bliss? Yeah. The room's still a lot quieter, isn't it?
What I noticed as I quieted is I became much more aware of the external world, the hum of the air conditioning, and then I became convinced that you were playing chimes or bells in the background, because I kept hearing some little sounds. Mm-hmm. Even though it was quiet, there was a hum of the universe or something. So somewhere, when you asked, was I alive, it felt like there was more alive than ever. Like that, yes.
And how many other people heard chimes? Everyone. You see, you're universal. There was some tinkling going on in the actual physical universe. There was a little chime. So it wasn't purely inside your head. Well, at least I don't think so. I heard it. Yeah.
The thought came to me too, I may not be alive. This may be an illusion, this may be my perception of myself being alive. And then I felt this beautiful sense of consciousness that when I'm no longer alive this way, that it was bigger than I was, and it was okay. And it was just like an enlargement. It was really a beautiful feeling.
Great, yeah. And it is that aliveness is so closely connected to the self, the consciousness. I think of that sense of aliveness as one of the dimensions of the self. How many people felt a sense of expansion into space? Good, yeah. Do this for a couple of weeks and we'll all be well on our way.
A few things, happened to me, especially when you were asking questions. It seems like I dream more than I think. And some people have told me I should sleep more. But I do, I sleep a lot. But when I'm meditating, it seems I can go into an easy dream state, and there's richness in that dream state, and I say, well, I'm dreaming. And then go back to that place of, well, the way you said it was, and I hadn't heard it that way, where I feel alive. Mm-hmm. And my breath and breathing into my heart. And then when you said that again, I also felt like the little pain, the places of pain in my body, or the places of stiffness. Mm-hmm. And that in a sense reminded me that I was in my body and that I was alive too. And I just thought, wow, I wonder how much we have to experience pain to feel alive, rather than joy in that. So.
Well, we certainly do. How much we have to, I don't know. I sometimes think, pain, when pain is there, I think it needs to be felt, to be allowed, to be experienced, rather than blocked and pushed down. I think that's one of the universal principles. If you push pain down, it doesn't really help at all. When you let it up, usually we don't want to do that because the experience is worse when we first let pain up. But so many times there's either healing in allowing the pain to come through, or there's learning, whatever. But I also feel, if we can choose whether to be in pain or not. I mean, I find that sometimes when I'm sitting meditating, I'll notice, I get a pain in my shoulder or something. I can either, sit there and let it up and do all that stuff, or I can realize that if I just let that muscle go a little bit, wow, it actually goes away. And so there's also a teaching about how I may be holding my body in such a way to create pain. So that's when I'm saying we don't have to experience it. There may be ways we can actually, it may show us something of how we can let go of what is causing the pain as well. Yeah.
Before I go to sleep at night, I generally, almost always, say to myself, may I be happy, may I be healthy, may I be serene and at peace. And when I say that to myself, I feel that in the present rather than something that I hope will happen in the future. Yeah, yeah. And I was just wondering where this sort of ties in with your recommendation, first of all, to be in touch with what we really want, rather than be worrying about this, that, and the other. As being 76 years old, naturally I'm concerned somewhat about health. Yeah. What will my health be 5 years from now, or maybe tomorrow? And but that puts me at ease in the present, and I stop worrying.
Yeah. And that, what you're talking about, as you probably know, is a very common practice that comes out of Buddhism, that sort of practice. But I think what you're asking for there is the general. May I be at peace? May I be healthy, etc. This comes back to the question about the fruits, the fruitful. I mean, you're not asking for, I want X so that I may be at peace. No. You're asking for what you want, and you're leaving the mechanism wide open. And I think that's how prayer should be. It's not, I think we make a mistake when we pray for something. Yeah. We should pray for the quality that we want. And the quality is health, peace, serenity, whatever it is. So it fits perfectly.
Thank you.
Yeah. In fact, maybe let's just focus on prayer a bit. It's another exercise I'd like to do. But by prayer, I mean something different than what you might think I mean. What I've discovered is if I am caught up in some inner turmoil, some mental, emotional suffering of some sort, some degree of unsatisfactoriness in my life. As I said earlier, the first reaction is to blame it on circumstances. And if I'm stuck in that, then what I would pray for is for the circumstances to change. You know, this person change or whatever it is. But what I realize is that the reason I'm caught up in suffering is because I am stuck in a certain mode of perceiving the situation, a certain way of interpreting it. And that's what's creating my discomfort for me. So what I do these days, I consider prayer as not prayer for the external circumstances to change or for guidance as to what I should do with regard to these circumstances, but much better to ask for a different way of perceiving the situation. And when that happens, time and again I find magic happens. Because when I change the way I see the situation, everything else then begins to fall out. And prayer for me is not so much praying to an external being, but is really praying to the divine, or whatever you want to call it, the deepest level of self, my own inner core. The level at which there is wisdom. I think we all have infinite wisdom within us all, but we're not in touch with it because of this layering over of all our thoughts and emotions and stuff. We're not in touch with that inner wisdom. And so it's how do we open up to the guidance that is there. So I thought it might be nice just to do that, do an exercise on that, do a little practice on that, particularly while we're in this nice, quieter state where we've already softened a little of the thinking habits, the habitual thinking. But before we do the exercise, think of something in your life where you would appreciate some help, guidance, something where there is some unsatisfactoriness, where there is some mental or emotional stuff going on that you'd rather not have going on with anybody or anything. It usually involves people. Sometimes it involves airline computers, but it usually involves people, family, work, whatever it is. So think of some situation where there's some unsatisfactoriness around a given situation in your life. And I'm assuming nobody has any problem identifying at least one of these. So probably just take the first one that comes to mind. That's usually the best thing to use. But to begin with, let's just just take a moment just to settle back and just touch into that space in yourself that we were in before. Just in your own way, just settle down. And first of all, just get that sense of being here, of sitting here, of just your body being here, and just aware of that, the sensations, the breathing. And again, that sense of aliveness, however it comes. And as before, when you notice yourself, when the mind starts drifting off or thinking about it or thinking about other things, just gently come back to that sense of being. Just that inner sense of being, however it is for you. And if there's a sense of joy or freedom or peacefulness, just savor that. Just notice it, appreciate it. And just know that there is immense wisdom within you, immense wisdom. Deep down, you know everything you need to know. And maybe just remember times when that wisdom has guided you. And just allow a sense of gratitude to be there. And this truly is something to be grateful for. That we only need to turn within, and the wisdom we want is there, the guidance we need is there. And that is something to be really grateful for. And just allow a sense of gratitude to be there in your being. And now recall that situation in your life where you would like some guidance, whatever it is that's going on for you in your life that's causing you some unsatisfactoriness. Just recall that. Don't get into all the stuff you tell yourself about it and the other person or whatever it is, but just remember the situation and then just ask is there another way of perceiving this? Just ask the question. Don't try and make anything happen, but just hold that question. Is there another way of seeing this? And just notice whatever comes up. No need to judge or analyze. But just ask that question, is there another way of looking at this? And all you're doing is asking the question. You're not trying to make anything happen. You're just asking that question. Is there another way? And if something has come to mind, if another way has come to mind, just notice what that might suggest as to how you might respond to the situation. Does it suggest you might respond in a different way? How do you now feel about that situation or circumstance? Has it changed your feeling towards it? And then again, just gently let your attention come back to being in the room. And I don't expect, every one of you to have had some major shift from that. I find probably 50% of the time something useful happens. But since it's for free, that's fine. 50% is good. The main thing is just to have a little practice in doing the process to see how it works. But how many people did find they had some new perception, some new way of seeing it? Just show your hands. How many of you would say that what came was a more loving response? Most of you. And how many would feel more at peace with the situation now? Good. Pretty good. And how many feel now they can go back to that situation with maybe a different approach? Yeah. It's interesting, coming back to Greek, the Greek word for forgiveness means to let go. Physically let go of something. So what you're experiencing now is just the experience of forgiveness, of letting go of a certain fixed way of perceiving a situation and inviting another more loving, more peaceful, more joyful perception of the situation to come in. That's forgiveness. Would anyone like to share the change that happened? Yes?
Okay, instead of doing this wrong, I'm trying to make my voice loud enough. Can you hear me?
Can you hear over there?
I think I was jumping
Oh, there's a microphone up there, yeah. Thanks.
Okay, one of my problems is that I jumped the gun, and I think when I went to the microphone the first time. Okay, metanoia is a Greek word that means to turn the soul around. Okay, so this last exercise, when I put my attention on a problem that I've been thinking about for quite some time, literally what we're doing in our soul, what I did was to turn the dianoia around and to contemplate the issue. And what I got was, no. So,
but a good no, it feels good.
well, interestingly enough, it isn't the answer that I would have hoped for, you know. I mean, it's usually when one pursues something that I think is meaningful, you know, I would have expected somehow a little strategy or some little game or something to come, but no. And that, interestingly enough, did settle my soul once and for all. No.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Someone else like to share? Yes?
Since we're dealing with Greek words, I have been trying to practice ataraxia, which I understand the definition is equanimity in the midst of discomfort. I have a situation where I
Can you just speak up a little bit?
Yes, I will try. I'm getting a little hoarse. I worked 2 years on restoring, actually building a cabin. It had the shell, and, well, I'm losing my voice. I can't do it. In any case, then you may say I made the mistake of renting it to 2 young people who've never kept house before. And it was pristine when they went into it. So I live 100 yards away from the cabin, and so I made myself miserable for many days and nights, wondering what was going to happen inside the cabin until they left. They're leaving in the midst of June, and I found my peace by saying, I don't know what I said to myself right at this moment, but in any case, I did find peace and decided to live with it and stop worrying about it until they leave, and then take whatever comes at that time. I don't know exactly what I'm saying, but that's what I experienced.
Yeah. Great. We need to finish, actually. One more, okay?
I was specifically curious about your videotapes, what the differences were, and if there would be one in particular you'd recommend to people that weren't necessarily interested in spirituality or metaphysics, which if one was better than the other, or the differences in your videotapes?
They all have subtle metaphysical stuff in them. You're not going to escape that with me. I wouldn't make a tape if it didn't. The Global Brain was made 20 years ago, and it shows, but it's still the most popular tape. The White Hole in Time was about 10 years ago. I like it more, but all my work, all my tapes are really about looking behind the global situation. The Global Brain is about the whole growth of the internet, etc., and global consciousness, but looking behind it to the spiritual challenges. The White Hole in Time is about accelerating rates of change and accelerating evolution and the pressures that putting on us, but again, coming back to the inner changes that we need to make. So, toss a coin. Whatever feels right to you. Do one of those little, or buy them both. So yeah, let's pause now, finish, and let me just say on that exercise before we all disband, that thing about the gratitude I find really important. When I do that exercise, I find it really important, first of all, just to settle down into myself as much as I can in a short time, just to quieten some of that thinking mind. The quieter you are, the better it's going to be. So just to settle down, and then just to be in touch with that sense of gratitude for the guidance that is there within us, for what we carry with us, is important. And I think it's important because it takes my ego mind out of it. The gratitude is part of me recognizing something that's bigger than my little ego mind, and is helping to allow me to turn my thinking over to the deeper self. So I really find that's an important part of it, not to rush into it. And then the third thing is the way I phrase the question. It's not what is another way of seeing this, which puts me into a what is it, where is it searching mode, but just completely open, is there another way? Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. And usually when there is, it comes up pretty quick, usually a second or two. But I give that to you just as something to take away, and I even use it for tiny things in the day when I'm finding myself stuck in a certain pattern of thought. We have so many, well, at least speaking for myself, I have so many what I call mental addictions, little thought patterns that I get stuck in about the right way to do something or respond to something. Whenever I catch one of those, just to ask myself that question, I find is the best way for breaking those little mental addictions. And I think that's a key part of waking up, is just stepping beside all those little things. So take it away and play with it and have fun is the main thing. Okay, thank you.